Hi, this is James, and I'd like to welcome you to part 5 of my 6-part video series where I'm sharing the meanings that I use when I work and study with the Lenormand. So if you're just joining me for this series was inspired by a couple of my viewers, Miss Ellen Carla, who each asked me if I would be willing to make a video, or in my case videos, because I'm very wordy, where I detailed some of the meanings that I have cultivated through either reference material and learning from other people, some people who are further along in their Lenormand journey and experience than myself, but as well as, meanings that I've cultivated through my own actually daily practice and working with the cards on a recurring or regular basis. So some of these meanings are going to be a blend of both, but that is the inspiration. If you've been following along with me up to this point, I want to continually thank you for watching the videos, for liking them, for commenting on them, and for those of you who have even said that you're always looking forward to the next installment. So that means the world to me. I appreciate the support and the encouragement. And so as I always do in these videos, I would like to now introduce the deck that's going to be walking us through this exploration. And once again, we are going to be working with La Faneuse Lilac Dondorf. And just as I have in previous installments, I will be leaving information about the deck in the description box below so you can learn more about it. Or if you're building your Lenormand collection like I am, you may want to think about whether you'd like to acquire it and add it to your own personal collection. So now that I've explained why I'm doing the series and the deck that's going to be walking us through this exploration, let's now get to the table and take a closer look at the cards, starting with card 25, which is Ring. And here we are with card 25 in the deck, and card 25 is Ring. So my first immediate go-to keywords with Ring are contract, commitment, and agreement. I also think of things like promise, pledge, vow, or an oath with Ring. Ring can signify an engagement, so that would be an actual engagement or something that we are engaging with or in with another person, and as well as a wedding. Because of the circular nature of Ring, I think of things like a cycle, something that's circular, or something that's recurring. Keeping with the literal aspect of Lenormand, ring can represent an actual ring or some other type of jewelry. And going with some other things that we've talked about with ring already, this card can represent a bond, a union, or a merger. Ring can represent connection. And then my last association, going with, again, the circular aspect of ring, it can represent, circulation. So those are my associations with ring, and now we'll move on to the next card in the line, which is book. And now here we are with card 26, which is book. And if you watched any of my videos long enough to know, then you know book is one of my all-time favorite cards in the deck. So for me, when I think of book, I first think of knowledge. Book for me is a card of education, and with that, teaching or learning. So you can think of people who are teachers, or you could think of students with this card. And then going with the student aspect of the card, this card can represent a course of study. Keeping with the literal aspect of the card, this card can represent an actual book. And so since a book is a form of creativity, I also think of a creative project with book or some other kind of project. And again, keeping with the book aspect of the card, this card can represent a writer, an author, or a novelist. Now these next two associations are some of my personal ones. So book can represent a reader, and with that it can be a book reader or a reader of cards. So that could be tarot cards, angel cards, oracle cards, card reader like that. And then going with the card reader aspect of book, book can represent a deck of cards. And so keeping this relative to the context of this series, deck could represent the Lenormand itself. And then because the book is closed on this depiction, because in some decks the book is open and in some it's closed. If it's closed, it can represent a mystery or a secret. Or if you want to combine a couple of terms with book, it could be a mystery novel or somebody who is a mystery novelist. And so going with the open or shut aspect of the book, it could represent, since book represents knowledge, it could be, if the book is open on the card, you could think of it as, public knowledge, knowledge that's accessible because the book is open. If it's closed, you could suggest possibly that it could mean knowledge that's not open for public consumption, meaning it could be knowledge that's personal knowledge. And going with the idea of personal knowledge, book can then represent a journal or a diary. Now, if you read with direction in mind, there's a tip here that you could use with the book. Sometimes the page side of book, the book that has the pages exposed, the card that's to the right of that could represent knowledge that's open, knowledge that's familiar, known, exposed, that kind of thing, because that part of the book is exposed. And then the card to the left of it, because of the spine aspect of the book, could suggest knowledge that is hasn't been revealed, hasn't been uncovered, that kind of energy. So if you read that in mind, you could try that tip and see how that helps shed some light on the situation that you're looking at. And so that will wrap up how I look at book. And so now we'll move on to the next card in the line, which is letter. And now moving on to the next card in the line, we have letter, card 27. And so when I see letter, I sometimes think of paper or a document. Now earlier on, we talked about birds being verbal communication. Letter is written correspondence or written forms of communication. And with that, you could think of things like text or email. Letter can represent a post on social media or a blog post. In keeping with that, it can represent an article. I tend to look at letter sometimes as a statement or an invoice. And then along those lines, letter can represent mail, and with that, an actual letter. It can represent a note or some type of notice. Letter can also represent a newspaper or a magazine. If you go with the idea of book, the card that came before it, whereas book would have more information in it because of its size, you want to think of letter as more concise information, which is why I think of newspapers or magazines, because they still inform us of things, they still have things that we can learn from, but the delivery of it or the mode of it or the form it takes is usually more concise than an actual book. And then my last association for letter is documentation or something being documented. And that's going with the document aspect that I mentioned earlier. So those are my associations for letter, and now we'll move on to the next card in the line, which is gentleman. And here we are with card 28, the next card in the line, and this is gentleman. This is going to be very easy to discuss because gentleman is what we call a significator card. And as such, it represents a man. And so if you're a man and you're doing a reading, gentleman would represent you if you're reading for yourself. If you're a woman and you're doing a reading for yourself, the gentleman card would represent a man who is significant to you. So this could be a boyfriend, partner, spouse, you know, any man who might play a significant role in the situation that you're looking at. So now, since the card just represents a man, you would be mindful to look at the surrounding cards to see a couple of things. Surrounding cards to describe more about who the man is, or what action he's taking in the situation, or what he might be experiencing. So again, the gentleman card just usually represents a man. If you're a man, he would represent you. If you're a woman, this would be a man who's significant to you in the context of the situation that you're looking at through the cards. And so now we'll move on to the other half of gentleman, which is lady. And so now here we are with card 29, which is lady. And lady, just like gentleman, is a significator card. And this card will represent a woman. So if you're a woman and you're doing a reading for yourself, this would be your card. You would look for her in your reading. And if you're a man doing a reading, the lady card would represent a woman who's significant to you. So just like gentlemen before, this could represent a girlfriend, it could represent a partner, it could represent a spouse, or some other significant woman keeping with the context of your situation. Right? And so I didn't mention this with the gentleman card before, but the reason why I have two is that in the Lilac Dondoff, there are two gentleman cards and two lady cards. And that's one of the reasons why I like this deck. And if you notice that they are mirror images of each other, and they're facing opposite directions. And so one of the reasons why I like working with this deck is because it allows me to do same-sex readings, and I've already talked about that. So this keeps me from having to use, in this particular case, the snake card as the female partner of a lesbian, or in the case of gentlemen before, I don't have to use a rider or a dog, right? I could just use the additional card for a same-sex reading. So that's, again, this is a personal reason why I like this deck. So, and I actually do same-sex couple readings, so it's important for me to have a deck that at least has these cards in it. And this way I don't have to use the other cards, because then they could still fulfill their traditional role or function in terms of meanings. So again, the lady card would represent a woman. So if you're a woman and you read for yourself, this would be the card that you would look for, and she would represent you. And if you're a man, the lady card would represent a woman who's significant to the situation that you are looking at the cards with. And so now let's move on to the last card for this video, and that is Lilies. All right, and here we are with the last card for this video installment, card 30, which is Lilies. So when I have Lilies come up in a reading, my first immediate go-to keywords are things like peace, protection, harmony, and tranquility. I think of maturity, someone who's a senior or an elder. And with that, it's because they carry a great deal of wisdom. So wisdom is another one of my words for Lilies. I also think of something old, an antique, the past, or something that's aged. And going with the past aspect of Lilies, I think of memory, or a memorial, going with the idea that lilies is a flower that's used to remember people who have passed on. Now this is another card that can represent sex, And we talked about that with whip before. So for me, whip is like casual sex. And so lilies is different from that in that it can represent, you know, sex with some level of comfort. Sex that's familiar, or that you have some sense of familiarity with the partner that you're with. And that can also represent sexual relations with someone faithful. Now, I also think with lilies, I think of winter. And in particular, I think of Easter. And so sometimes when lilies is the last card for me in a line, I usually associate that with timing. And I did have that bear out, which is why I'm mentioning it now. So that's one of my personal associations with this, is winter and Easter in particular. Right, and so the last thing I want to mention with the lilies card is that it is a face card. So this card can represent a person. And here we have the King of Spades. So the King of Spades can represent a man. And with that, it's an older man. Somebody who could be seen as a protector. Or someone who is virtuous. And so those are my associations for lilies. And that brings this video installment to a close. And so in our next video, we're going to wrap things up with the final 6 cards in the deck. So as I close, I'm Jameson Mitchell, and I'd like to thank you for joining me and sharing space with me as we covered these 6 cards. And I look forward to sharing the same space with you again in our next and final video in this series. So until then, I'm hoping that you have a wonderful day and take care.